Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Coffee and Tea with AARP Connecticut. This bi-weekly virtual conversation series features AARP staff and volunteers, as well as decision makers from across Connecticut. In our conversation, we discuss a variety of topics affecting Connecticut's older residents. Today, we are joined by AARP Connecticut volunteer Jim O'Brien and State Representative Stephen Meskers. And this morning, we're going to discuss issues such as retirement security, affordable utilities, access to high-speed internet, as well as other topics affecting Connecticut's families. So first, I'd like to introduce my very capable volunteer, Jim O'Brien. And Jim, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do at AARP, where you're from, and what your background is?
Thank you very much for having me, and good morning to you, Representative Meskers. I live in Cheshire. I've been a volunteer with AARP for over 10 years. I principally started volunteering on advocacy issues, talking with legislators about things that are legislatively important to AARP on the state level and on the federal level. I continue to volunteer with AARP on our electric rate choice, and I've been very active in that. Participated early on in the process, the legislative process, to get the General Assembly to change the way that third-party operators were working in the state. And over the years, we've been very successful in doing that, thanks to the DPUC and the legislative changes that have been effected. Presently, I'm involved with the My Connecticut Savings Plan program, and I'm looking forward to doing more with that in the years ahead.
Thank you so much, Jim. And Jim is one of our great volunteers. And at AARP, we say the strength of our organization, particularly at the Capitol in Washington and in Hartford, is our volunteers and all they do on our behalf. So we're very pleased this morning to have one of the great legislators who's a very strong supporter of the AARP agenda up at the state Capitol. And I'm happy he was able to join us this morning, and that's State Representative Stephen Meskers. Good morning, Representative Meskers.
Good morning. Thank you very much. John, it's a pleasure to be here today. It's exciting for me. It's been a meaningful journey for me. I got elected 2 sessions ago, so I'm into my 3rd year. So it's a biennial election, so I'm into my 2nd term. We've done one session. We've got the next session coming up. Hopefully it'll be an in-person session, obviously, depending on how quickly the Delta variant burns out. But I got elected in, this 3 years ago. It was my first time in the legislature. I met you, John, probably we were busy advocating on, I think at that point, I want to say both insulin and affordability on medicine, and obviously in energy and technology, where I sit on third-party energy suppliers and regulation of the market. So, I was lucky. I got elected. I spent 35 years on Wall Street. It was a pretty good career. The focus principally, since I've gotten up to Hartford, has been in energy and technology, insurance, which obviously is a concern for all of us, and into transportation. And then I was nominated as well in my first term, which was quite an honor to be the vice chair of the Bonding, Revenue, and Finance Committee. So if you think about this from a state or federal level, we don't have a Ways and Means Committee, which is the intermediate committee. We have a taxation or fundraising, which is Bonding, Revenue, and Finance Committee, and we have appropriations, which are expenditures. So we basically have one side that fills the wallet, one side that empties the wallet. I'm on the side that fills the wallet, but the good news is, one, I'm 63 myself. My mom is 90, and will be 91 in March. So I'm not looking to fill my wallet from the people who are currently members of AARP, and I'm looking to protect their livelihoods and their welfare. So, I have to say, among the lobbying groups, I've enjoyed all the lobbyists, because having worked on Wall Street, I get strong advocates from people, some of who I find rather interesting and curious on their agendas. And then I get to people like AARP, and you look, and for the most part, I have to say the agenda, well, in entirety, its agenda is so good, and they have such a great advocate in you, John. And I think the only question is how much of the agenda can we fulfill and in what time frame? Because
Sure.
I think the needs are there. And I think taking care of our seniors who have been here and contributed to the state through their taxes and through their volunteer work, like Mr. O'Brien, I mean, you look at what everyone's done and you say they've given so much to the community, you want to make sure you treat them fairly.
Yeah, and we appreciate that. And as you mentioned, it's the crew like our volunteers, Jim O'Brien and others, many others, hundreds across the state, and not only in advocacy, but in our programs that give us the strength that we have. And I often tell our volunteers, legislators hear from me, but it's their work and their presence that gives me the ability to bring a message forward. And you folks listen to me because of folks like Jim. But you mentioned something and it is a very prestigious thing. You're vice chairman of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee, a very important committee in the legislature. It deals, as you said, with taxation. And it's been a committee that, until the last few years, AARP wasn't as active in, but we've gotten active in it, primarily because Connecticut was one of the few states where there is a state income tax where retirement income was taxable. And AARP, often raised that issue with the various administrations, both the Malloy and Lamont administrations. And the legislature, through the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee in the last several years, have taken a few steps to kind of help alleviate the tax burden on retirees in Connecticut. So, Representative, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on the taxation of retirement income and what our folks need to know?
Okay, so I'm an ally, and it'll be in a frightening way. I'm an ally on both sides of the equation. I'm an ally of raising revenue for the state of Connecticut. I've got to pay for the services we want to provide. And I'm an ally of our retirees because our retirees, have one, paid taxes, two, I want them to stay in the state. And it's not as if you get a tax-free ride if you stay in the state. If you stay in the state and you're retired and you have, a modest but dependable income, you're likely to go out for dinner. So you pay sales tax, you tip waiters, you have gardeners, you have plumbers, you have electricians, you need services that you consume in my state. So when I look at that from the point of view of a revenue source, driving people out of the state, and that goes as wide to income tax to estate tax, I need people in the state consuming, spending, being economically active and viable, and rewarding them for that. So I need not drive them away. So the first thing I'm coming on board, John, you had spoken to me about that. And I don't know if it was a revenue stricture when we did the budget originally, but originally we had set up the pension exemption for Social Security, and we had started to exempt annuity income like 401ks. So the graduated step leaves, I believe, the Social Security at the current environment at 100% tax exempt, right? If your income is $75,000 and lower as an individual, and I believe that the hurdle is 125 for married couples. So if your pension income is from Social Security plus others are below those thresholds, 100% of the Social Security is exempt. Now, for some reason with the original drafting, and you can't blame me because I wasn't there, and I am a banker, so I do claim to know numbers, we didn't include the totality of your pension income in the scaling up of an exemption. So at some point, and it covers me. So I was working, I had a 401k, I retire. It's a rather standardized process is that you usually move your money from your place of employ and roll it over into an IRA, which is a non-tax event. But classifying income or classifying an investment portfolio as a 401k and moving it to an IRA, if you start to withdraw from the IRA in Connecticut, you had taxes. If you had kept it in the 401k and withdrew it, you were scaled into an exemption. Now, it's still not 100%, it's going up to 100%. But I was like, this makes no sense to me. If I do my typical modern issue of moving from a 401k to an IRA, and 10 years from now, I want to withdraw money from it, or I'm in my minimum distributions, which are at 70 and a half, I believe, maybe 71, a little rusty on the exact date, you don't get the exemption. I'm like, who wrote this law? So this year I was happy, at John, who was, I guess politely beating me and encouraging me or cheering me on, depending on how you want to look at it. We basically finally forced it through the administration to include the exemption for IRAs as well. Now, the way we stand right now is, so lest you call your tax attorney today and yell at him. So going back, pension and annuity income in 21 is 42% exempt. So of $1, 42% of it is not taxable, 58% is taxable. In 22, it steps up to 56%. So it gradually moves up. And by 2025, that 401k pension income, if you're underneath 75 or 125, as you mentioned, is 100% exempt, right? What we did going forward as well, so this is a little bit further out, but IRA income starting in 2023 goes to 25% exempt, in 24, 50, in 25, 75, and in 26, 100%. So both of them between 25 and 26, 2026 will be 100% exempt from state income tax. That represents a 6% or 5.99 tax savings, which is your Connecticut income tax rate.
Right. So basically that is something we've been fighting for, and we understand the reasoning behind gradually phasing them out. We never understood the reasoning of not including the IRA income, but we certainly thank and appreciate your work on getting that included into the phase out. So, Connecticut will finally join the rest of the states with the state income tax. And for all intents and purposes, middle income seniors and those below middle income will be paying no income tax on retirement income as a part of their totality of income. So Jim, let me work into this conversation. Why is that so critical for the 50 plus voter and resident of the state of Connecticut?
Because as Representative Meskers says, we want to keep folks in Connecticut. Having to leave the state is not economically feasible for the state. 50 plus individuals represent just about 37% of the state's population, yet they buy products and services, et cetera, in the state. They buy 47% of the products and services in the state, and they pay 49% of the taxes. So they provide more economic benefit than they are reflected in the population. So you're absolutely right, Representative Meskers, to do what you can to keep older folks in Connecticut. We want to stay, but for many folks, it can be a financial decision, and this will affect their financial choices.
Right, and that's so right, Jim, and I'm glad you gave that information, because it's always, Representative Meskers and Jim, it's always counterintuitive. People a lot of times think, well, seniors are a drain on the economy, when in fact, when you put that money back into their pockets, it doesn't stay in their pockets, right? Because they have less disposable income, and any dollar you put into their pocket goes right back into the economy. And that's why at AARP, we've always fought for things like making sure retirees are included in stimulus payments. Otherwise, because that money, it just gets pumped right back into the economy. And so it's critical for Connecticut for us to do that. So we really do appreciate that. And we just have to make sure over the years, there have been attempts to roll back those exemptions and change the scale. I know Governor Lamont actually proposed pushing off by 2 years the phase out. And we appreciate your work on making sure not only, we were so happy because not only did the phase out not get pushed back another 2 years, but you were able to work with your colleagues and make sure that IRA income was included. And I will say, and Jim can attest to this is an issue that has resonated with our members more than any other issue, because they want to stay here in Connecticut. It's their home. It's where their children, their grandchildren are. And a lot of them were forced to leave the state and make decisions based on, what the law was or what they thought the law was going to be. And so that was very critical. And we appreciate that so much.
No, I appreciate it. And I'll add to that, just from the point of view, it's not just that they're going to consume 100 cents on the dollar. So if you're thinking of it from a social point of view, and I'm not just the guy with the vacuum cleaner as the tax collector in bonding, revenue, and finance. I'm also, I have a social conscience. People who are at lower end of disposable income, this is important in paying for medicines, et cetera. people are in the middle of their, the income stream. This provides them with the wherewithal. It gives them an easement to consume. So they're out there in the economy, contributing to the economy, and it's counterintuitive in that I thought what Jim mentioned was so clear. So you spend the first 20 years of your life, if you're in a married life, saving, paying the mortgage or paying off the mortgage for 20, 30 years, or paying the kids or helping the kids through college. So at the point you get to retirement, you're not in the accumulator phase. So the fact is, if we lower and keep them in the state, they're in that point where they're in the consumption phase of their life in terms of whether if they're going out for breakfast or going out for lunch or going out for dinner or paying for services, and just I want that income. I want that economic activity. It's a win-win, and that's why I was such a strong proponent. I think I think our seniors contribute so much. Look at what Jim is doing. People contribute in their golden years. They contribute so much to the economy and to the social network. Food banks, et cetera. The people I see doing all the volunteer work, who have got the shovel or the broom in their hands, are seniors, and it's so important to make sure we tell them, one, we care, and welcome them to stay.
Well, we appreciate that.
Absolutely right. Most of the retirees who I know and have become close to volunteer every week at something.
That's absolutely right, and we appreciate our volunteers at AARP. So let's shift gears just a little bit, because I know the clock is ticking here. Representative Meskers, one of the issues that we've worked with you on very carefully and closely over the years, it's just something that's very near and dear to my heart, I know to Jim's heart, and I certainly know to your heart, is the issue of third-party electric suppliers, right? In Connecticut, you get your energy delivered to you from the electric distribution companies, either Eversource or UI, depending on where you live in the state. I happen to live in a UI territory, but I previously lived in an Eversource territory. But you have the right to get your generation from a third party. And that can be a very tricky and confusing thing. And frequently what we found is that the majority of people that go into the third party electric supplier market end up paying more for electricity than if they stayed with the standard service, because somebody with your a career background will get this. It's almost like when you go into a third party supplier arrangement, it's like day trading on a stock, right? I mean, you have to watch and monitor it every day. And we found so many folks, particularly the vulnerable, seniors, low income residents, people with English as a second language, or primarily Hispanic, Latino, minorities, are ones that are getting taken advantage by a lot of these suppliers. So tell us a little bit about what you've done recently. There's been a lot more expansions in our protections for consumers with these suppliers. And why don't you talk a little bit about what we were able to do this year and what you like to see happen moving forward. And then I'll work Jim into the conversation to have him talk a little bit about our electric choice program, where we educate the public about how to choose a supplier. So.
Okay, well, by way of background, of course, having spent 35 years on Wall Street, I was in the bond business, and it was the issuance and sale of bonds to mutual funds. So I sat there and I had the presidents of major companies in South America going in to talk to the big wigs at Fidelity or PIMCO, all the major mutual funds who may manage your retirement income. So I saw a group of sharks battling each other to figure out value and structure, to argue about interest rates, the business model, et cetera. And you become, after so many years of going through so many of these quote unquote bond shows, you begin to read the market. So in the electric utility market, John comes to me and he's like, these third party guys, I'm not sure what's going on here. We're not in favor of how the market is playing out. We need regulatory relief. I go and I'm thinking there's got to be a great business here, and I must not be understanding it. So I sat through about 3 or 4 presentations. The first one was, God, this sounds like an interesting business. The second time is, I don't understand the business model. The third time is, I feel like someone's got their fingers in my wallet. And the fourth time is, how do I slow this down? So on a regulatory framework, we looked at the third-party energy suppliers, and you can make it very complicated, you can make it very simple, but it's essentially the same as the credit card roll your balance over to the new credit card company for a discount, which lasts for about 3 months. And all of a sudden, you're paying 19% on your balance. It's the same thing. It's what I would refer to as a bait and switch game. It's come to us, we'll offer you a discount. You take your eye off the ball at the next rollover period, it goes from a 10 or 20% discount to a 50% premium. So you're spending 15 cents a kilowatt instead of 11 when you take your eye off the ball. And you go into that in perpetuity. And then the smart people, or the people like the people who clip their coupons before the supermarket every time, they may catch it and get rid of it, but a lot of people get dragged into an overcharge system.
So
the
this
first
past session, what were we able to accomplish in this past session? Like, I know you did some major things moving forward.
So on the past session, so I had the conversations late in the session because, you know, it was in the very beginning of my career. And I had the conversations going into this past session with Pura, and I just leaned in because they were already inclined to go that way. They said, we need regulatory relief. So they issued a docket and a finding, and they barred the third-party energy suppliers from the energy assistance market. Now, why would we care as retirees? Well, as retirees, if we're at that level and with where we need energy assistance, we're no longer going to be preyed upon with exorbitant fees with higher charge third-party energy suppliers.
Right. So basically, these suppliers were getting people who are getting our energy assistance programs and locking them into rates higher than if they weren't on standard service, right? And who pays that, Representative?
Well, so to the extent there, it's the taxpayer, right? So I'm sitting there now, and now I wrestle with my banker Wall Street hat and my Florence Nightingale hat and saying, what do I want to do? So I want to allocate money for energy assistance for our vulnerable seniors and our vulnerable residents. The last thing I want to do when I allocate that money is hand it out to someone who's charging us 20, 30, or 40% more for the service. So I sat there and said, you know, we've got a fixed pool of energy assistance money. Our tax dollars are constrained. We want to do God's work, if you will. We want to help people do our best. And I said, we can't afford to have them facing a surcharge. So we kicked them out of the energy assistance market. Now, if you apply for energy assistance, one of the boxes takes you back to standard service and the standard rate, which is essential. So the first step I said is we estimated, I think last year was over $7 million of surcharges in the energy assistance market. So I should have prepared today the total amount we give in energy assistance, but I can tell you we were being overbilled $7 million in our energy assistance market with third party, with markups. Now, I have the option of helping $7 million more of people with taking them to the standard service. Now I have a lower cost to the energy assistance that I'm providing, and people in need, I can widen the net of people who need that assistance and do it efficiently. So that was one of the things we passed in the docket. I was a very strong advocate, and as you can hear from what even with John, so I hope won't steamroll over him in my talk. I sat in the committee and I was like, this is going to happen if I have to beat heads.
Absolutely, and we're coming close to time, believe it or not. But let me just say, I know you also helped us champion legislatively eliminating all cancellation fees on contracts. So if you get in a bad deal, right, people can get out of them now. And then one of the other things you talked about, more of a regulatory reform, for the first time ever, Pura is going to force energy suppliers to have to prove the product they're offering is of value to consumers. And those are important things. So Jim, why don't you tell us quickly about how to choose an electric supplier program is all about in a minute or two. So we can because we're out there educating the public about this market and what to look out for and what not to look out for.
And as you know, Representative, I'm sure people are interested in looking at electric rates, comparing them to Eversource or UI, the standard service rate, and they want to shop, but they can be afraid of shopping. And the changes that the Pura have made and you and the legislature have made the market a much safer place. When it first began 15 or so years ago, it was the Wild West. I never forget listening to one of our volunteers talking about how he ended up paying 30 and 40 and 50% more for electricity because he just really forgot to pay attention. And this man was a rocket scientist, so he knew the numbers. Now the market is stable. People are interested in getting out there. The state's done a great job with their website, putting the information, making it available, and we work with people and train them on how to go about doing that. But if it's not for the General Assembly and the changes you've made in the laws, it would still be the Wild West, and we really appreciate it.
And there's certainly a lot more we can do. So we are up on time, but before we do close, Representative Meskers, I wanted to ask if there's anything else you want to tell us briefly before we do wrap up.
Sure. So closing in on Third Energy, just a very simple issue of bad debt. You know, in the old days, there were two energy suppliers, it was United Illuminate and Eversource, before we did the deregulatory framework. And in that market, we socialized the bad debt bills because those were people who went bankrupt and couldn't afford their bill. So going forward, I am looking at a change in the regulatory environment for bad debt because now these third-party energy suppliers who, to my mind, are overcharging customers. If they have a customer who doesn't pay up, it goes into my bill and your bill and all of the AARP members' bill in a form of an increase in the distribution charge. So if people want to enter into a quote unquote free market and charge customers a surcharge for energy or provide the choice in energy markets, and they have customers who can't pay, I think I'm going to work on legislation to force them to bear that cost. I don't think the general public should be supporting private companies in their bill collection and making me pay for their decisions. I'm perfectly happy to subsidize standard rate contracts when people are in economic hardship and go bankrupt and can't pay, that we have to help bear the cost as a society, but I'm not interested in bearing that cost. So that's one measure there. Going forward, on other measures, I'm looking at seeing what we can do in equalizing estate tax exemptions, because I'd like to see more people retire and stay in the state who have the state planning questions. I don't want to encourage people to move to Florida. I understand the weather is a little warmer and better, but I'd like to keep our residents here. Secondly, I'll be working with the governor in the energy and technology with the ARPA money in the rollout of more broadband, because without a doubt, access and broadband and looking even at the billing process, you know, I've spoken to people, a number of people who are in what we call congregate living. So essentially in senior assisted living. And I want to see if we can get broadband packages to access so that each individual resident isn't paying a triple play of $200 or $300 a month for access to the internet to stay connected with their families. So there are a couple of issues there, right?
Those are all issues that I can guarantee you AARP is going to work with you on. And then I'm going to just close with Jim. Jim, I know Representative Meskers mentioned broadband. There is the federal emergency broadband benefit. Can you just tell us a little bit about what is available to qualified seniors and how they could find out about it?
Yes, if they qualify, it's based on income. They can get $50 a month toward their broadband from the federal government. They can get $100 one-time payment to help them pay for a laptop or to provide a smartphone so that they can access broadband.
Excellent. So I want to thank our guest today, Representative Stephen Meskers, who, as you can see, we have the right guy on the right committees working on the right issues for us at AARP. Representative Meskers, we thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Jim O'Brien, our great
guys.
volunteer. I appreciate all the work that you've all done. And that'll wrap it for another edition of Coffee and Tea with AARP Connecticut. Thank you, everyone.